Welcome back to another week of Behind the Lens. I'm Debbie Elias, film critic, creator, and host of Behind the Lens, where we go behind the lens and below the line with those movers and shakers, the film and TV makers, those producers, directors, writers, actors, cinematographers, production designers, costume designers, film editors, sound mixers, VFX master artisans, composers, choreographers, and more. And this week, it's all about the great outdoors as we take a look at two wonderful films. Now, if you're watching or listening to the show on the Adrenaline Radio Facebook live stream, you'll notice I'm not in the studio. A filmmaker was going to be joining us live today, but due to his production schedule, he became unavailable. With no live guest, I decided to save on gas and 4 hours of travel to and from the studio and pre-record today's show for you while I work on more reviews and interviews for you for the website and the show. But no worries, as these are two very interesting pre-recorded filmmaker interviews for you. First up is director George Nolfi talking about his thrilling action film, Elevation. Set in the post-apocalyptic Rocky Mountains, a single father and two women venture from the safety of their homes to face monstrous creatures to save the life of a young boy. Written by John Glenn, Jacob Roman, and Kenny Ryan, Elevation stars Anthony Mackie, Morena Baccarin, Maddie Hasson, and Danny Boyd Jr. Shot entirely on location at elevations above 8,200 feet and as high as 11,500 feet above sea level. This is a nail-biter. As you'll hear, George and I discuss the film's structure, visuals, and thematic elements, as well as the importance of shooting on real locations to create an authentic, naturalistic world. And how about the logistic challenges shooting at those altitudes with some mighty thin air? Diving in further, George talks about the minimal visual creature element of Elevation and the importance of sound design in enhancing suspense, not to mention the all-important editing aspect of the film. So rather than me prattle on, here you go. Take a listen to my exclusive interview with director George Nolfi talking about Elevation. Hi, George.
Hi, Debbie. How are you?
Very happy to be speaking with you about Elevation. I'm such an admirer of your work, be it the printed word in a screenplay or as a director. And
thank you.
With Elevation, though, boy, oh boy, you kept me on the edge of my chair as I watched this.
Thank you so much.
Just an amazing job with this at building tension and keeping us. I love the way this is structured, both on the page and visually. At the 30-minute mark, about the 30-minute mark, we get to see the Reaper for the first time. Early on, there was a tiny little glimpse of one, but you couldn't really see it. We finally get to see it about the 30-minute mark. Ends your first act. You go into the second act. Second act ends with a huge climactic moment that is very sad, but necessary to take us into that third act. So I love the structure and the emotional beats that you have timed out that way. It works really, really well.
Oh, thank you.
This is such an interesting story when you look at it thematically, and the fact that creatures have wiped out 95% of the planet, and the only people now able to survive, you've got to be above 8,000 feet. So this logistically becomes a real challenge for you if you want to shoot on location, which you did. So once you got this script and you realized the parameters that are set up for you, what was your approach to bringing the visuals to life and bringing in Shelley Johnson as your DP, which was brilliant?
Well, you hit on some of it, which is the visual approach is rooted in the idea of shooting in real places, because my touchstone generally as a filmmaker is to always create the most sort of authentic, realistic, naturalistic world that I can within the confines of the tone and premise of the movie. And I felt like this one the only leap that you should be making is, okay, something wiped out 95% of humanities, and what is that thing? Everything else I wanted to feel like, well, that's probably what it would be like.
Mm-hmm.
So if you do that, and you find real locations, then when you're having a visual conversation, it's like, well, I want people to care, so I want to be with my actors, a more subjective camera as opposed to proscenium standing back and looking at the world. I want to shoot in a way that doesn't feel like it has weird filters or colors or whatever. It just feels like that's, what the world is like. And an example is like, when it's night, should the light be blue? Because we're sort of used to that in a lot of movies. But if you go outside at night, you're not aware mentally. You're not thinking like, well, it's blue out. You're just thinking it's dim out. You know. So that's the sort of conversations you have with your DP. How you're going to shoot it, and what's the quality of the light going to be, and so forth. How do we make it feel like it's real, like we were there?
Mm-hmm. Well, you definitely took advantage of the fantastic locations that you found. The work in shooting inside the mine and utilizing a mine is just brilliant. And then you counter that with beautiful mountainscapes. Really give us a lay of the land and how unforgiving it is. Got your tree line there, but it's hard. It's not an easy life. And then you bring us into the town of this one, Last Gulch. And we see it's very rustic. It's very, the Wild West almost is what you and your production designer, Bill Bowes, created. And it works so beautifully. So I'm curious about coming up with this visual tonal bandwidth and incorporating elements like your production design, because that's so key as to what these people are facing and what they're dealing with.
Well, there I start the same way that we're talking about. Like, let me find a real place that's got as much of the stuff in it that would actually be there. So I need to find a town, preferably a town that's in real life above 8,000 feet, so I know what it feels like in terms of how hard it is to draw a breath if you're, doing something action-oriented, for example. Which we did. We found a town that was at 8,200 feet that had old construction, that didn't have had very few vehicles, that had dirt roads, and then you build from there. So that's what the houses look like on the outside in that real place. So now when we're going to film inside a house, some of what you're going to do on stage, we want to bring that look into that sort of stage work.
Mm-hmm. With the locations that you did find, and you're shooting above 8,200 feet, how logistically challenging was that for you and the crew, especially for Shelley and his team, bringing in cameras, bringing in lights?
Well, the most logistically challenging location was the ski lift. Mm-hmm. We are at 11,500 feet, and the air is thin enough up there that when you're asking, people to haul equipment or actors to run as fast as they can, you really feel it. Mm-hmm. We had to, I had to have them sprint, 150 feet uphill as fast as they could and dive across a line. Well, when they do that and they dive across that line, like, it's pretty real feeling. We couldn't use any lights. We couldn't touch the towers other than the actors and stunt people that were on them. Mm-hmm. For safety reasons. We were in national parkland, so we couldn't use whole bunches of vehicles or get them near a lot of places we were filming. Everything had to be schlepped in. It was an hour and a half from Boulder. Like, it's very challenging. But I think it allowed us to do a scene that you just haven't really seen in another film. There is no other film that has a true action scene on a ski lift,
Yeah, no, that scene is absolutely incredible. And it's very easy to see that the actors are giving it their all and how thin the air is up there. Because as they're sprinting, when they come down and they start sprinting, you can see the chests are heaving. You can't get your breath. So that just added to the suspense and the terror, because you very keenly don't populate the film with a ton of these reapers. You use them very judiciously, which I appreciate. Obviously, that was a conscious decision to minimize the exposure and the usage of the reapers themselves and go with the incredible sound. It's a great sensory experience. The sound design, sound mix is fabulous. We see smoke, we see golden glow, dragon-like flame burning in a distance as they're approaching. So this had to be deliberately done to really keep us in suspense here, George, and it works.
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, it was quite a process. My theory for why, because I always try and think what's the reason behind something. Why would the reapers only be, would you only encounter them rarely? Well, because there's nothing for them to kill anymore, right? And number one, and number two, just like a predatory cat, lion, or a jaguar, or a tiger, they have a range, and that range is, might be 100 square miles, and they take care of what's in that area,
No, I mean, it just works so beautifully. And going with the visual effects to represent their approach is just spectacular when we can't see, but we can hear. And, I mean, that harkens right back to Hitchcock's idea of don't show. Just let our imaginations run wild.
And Jaws.
And Jaws. So, and it really works in this story. Building the tension here is critical because we don't have this populated with a ton of background actors. It is the mountain. It's Anthony, Morena, and Maddie for the most part in character, climbing, trudging through up the mountainside, down the mountainside, through mines. What was then the hardest part or most challenging aspect of the editing to keep this moving and keep us invested with the focus on really these three individuals?
Well, I worked very closely with my editor. He's a producer on the movie as well. We've done a lot of projects together. He's on set, and he is editing as we go, which is a process that we've perfected over the years, so that I can look at what we've shot and look at it roughly assembled and say, I feel like, we need a little bit more here or there. Maybe we need another shot. He can suggest things. So we're pretty good at having a cut of the movie pretty fast. In this case, the visual effects are so prominent that there are big pieces missing. But the process of sort of honing it down to its bare minimum, which is what makes a drama really move fast and sing, is a process that we start on set. Maybe we don't need that line. Maybe maybe this look is enough. So by the time we're in the editing room a month later, the film is already at fighting length, and then it's like, well, what else can we trim to get us? I mean, the attention span of human beings is getting progressively shorter because of phones, right? And so it's phones and social media and so forth. So you really have to pack as much story and as much character development as possible into the smallest amount of time. And you do that with script trims. You do that with how fast the actors talk. You do that with editorial. But the final part is the editorial part. That's if you take out every excess moment, long pause that's too long, whatever, that's going to get you to that place where you feel like the story is just coming at you and you can't take your eyes off it.
Mm-hmm. Well, and here again, and the pace is fantastic. When it was over, I didn't even realize an hour and a half had gone by. I would have been happy to see another 20 minutes of this story.
Sequel. You'll see the sequel.
I want a sequel. Let me tell you, George, I want a sequel to this. But
well, the sequel is going to come from when people like you are out there saying it needs a sequel.
Oh, it definitely needs a sequel. This is why it's so important for people to sit through the credits.
Oh.
They must sit through the credits and the end titles. Very important in this one. But, well, let me quickly ask you then, how difficult was it casting this one? Obviously, you worked with Anthony. This is your third film together. But you needed actors that could tackle this terrain with athleticism. And we know Morena's done that before. So I'm just curious, how challenging was the casting?
Not very challenging at all. I had admired Morena's work. She was suggested as, a potential pairing. I said, I love her, send her the script. She liked the script. We talked, and that was it. I cast her. I'd obviously seen enough to know at that point. Maddie Hasson is somebody that we cast from tape and from looking at her stuff. And so I met her, and because I really liked the work that I saw, I met her and I said, hey, this movie's going to hurt in some ways. You're going to be up at high altitude and you're going to have to run and whatever. And she was like, that just makes me want to do it more. You're Ken. So.
One last thing. I mean, you threw what you mentioned about the dialogue and trimming things and all. One thing that really stood out for me in this, you've got a line of dialogue in there that Katie says, talking about how they're trapped like rats at the top of the hill there at Lost Gulch Refuge. And then throughout the film, and plus we got the pirate flag, that the rats abandoning the ship, fleeing to safety, but also throughout, as you go through the mines, as you twist and turn, it is like a maze that a rat goes through. So that one line really stood out to me, and how that followed through visually through the rest of the film. And it's a little thing, but I really love that you did that.
Oh, thank you very much.
George, job so well done. I really love this film, and I do want a sequel.
All right, well, it's in your hands.
I'll do my best. George. Thank you. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
And that was my exclusive interview with George Nolfi talking about Elevation. A terrific action thriller. Elevation is currently in theaters. And believe me, with the locations, the mountainous vistas are stunning. You want to see this in the theater. But now we're going to stay in the great outdoors and talk about some more upper elevation altitude films with Lost on a Mountain in Maine. This thrilling adventure comes to us courtesy of Andrew Kightlinger, written by Luke Paradise and based on the book of the same name. The film tells the inspiring story of 12-year-old Don Fendler, who, while climbing to the top of a famed local mountain in Maine in 1939, so this is set in 1939 and occurred in 1939, separated from his family by a fast-moving storm, he then had to fight to stay alive during a 9-day adventure, being lost in the backwoods of Maine as he had to traverse from a mountaintop down below a tree line to get down to any roads in any civilization. This adventure, this manhunt for 12-year-old Don marked the largest manhunt in the history of Maine up to that point. The local community, the state, they all mobilized with media jumping in as well to help find young Don. When he finally made it down from the mountaintop and actually saw people and was able to cry out for help, he was 80 miles from where his brothers and his dad had trekked and where he was lost. And the kicker of it all is that the searchers were concentrating their efforts at the base of the mountain that they had gone up originally. So the search parties weren't even anywhere near Don was. And Andrew takes us on this beautiful visual journey. He incorporates actual footage of interviews with members of the Fendler family, of Don, of his mother Ruth, members of the search parties. Interviews were done a number of years ago, and then there is actual footage of his rescue when emergency personnel put him on a stretcher to carry him up from the lake at which he had made his way to and was discovered. It's a film you have to stay through the credits, as is Elevation, by the way. When you're in the theater watching the film, stay there through the credits because there's great stuff at the end that you have to see. Lost on a Mountain in Maine, you really want to see this actual footage, which is also peppered throughout the film as interstitials. At every level, Lost on a Mountain in Maine soars with gorgeous visual storytelling, a beautiful, beautiful score, and Luke David Blum's award-worthy performance as Don Fendler. I think you're going to be fascinated with what Andrew has to say about the making of the film, including the casting process to find Don, the themes of the film, the location and production process combining upstate New York locations with actual footage of storms at the top of a mountain in Maine and actual portions of the 1939 Maine hikes on the same mountain. The choice to use practical effects and sound design to enhance the immersive experience. And, of course, Garth Stevenson's fabulous score, where he incorporates natural elements that really enhance the Mother Nature aspect. Because a big portion of this film, there is no dialogue, as we're following young Don on his adventure coming down from the mountain and everything he's encountering along the way. Just everything is so historically accurate. And it's a beautiful, beautiful, inspiring, and powerful film that should not be missed. So take a listen now as Andrew and I dig deep into Lost on a Mountain in Maine. Hi, Andrew. This is such a spectacular movie, Andrew. I was mesmerized throughout the entire film.
Keep talking. Keep saying these wonderful things.
To see how you have visually brought this story to life is just amazing. You've got a perfect marriage here of imagery and music, and the performance of Luke David Blum, who blew me away.
Isn't he great?
The emotion, the range of emotion that he brought to Don, absolutely astounding. To see Edon's work with the lighting and the lensing and some non-traditional framing. So we really see the power of Mother Nature. We see the joy of a young child. We also see terror of a child, but then offside, we get to see the parents and the reaction of others. But the focus here, it is a boy versus Mother Nature and challenging himself. You have delivered on every level, Andrew, every level.
I'm blown away, honestly. Thank you so much. You just listed off all the things that I tried to do with this movie in perfect summation, so I really appreciate it.
This is a tough kind of film to make when so much of it is observational. And watching Don traverse the mountain and the forested areas, it's all observation. So you've got to have something that's going to keep us engaged rather than watching a 12-year-old kid climbing rocks and trees and things. And you do that.
And that something is the actor.
Yeah.
Like that is the key. You know, we auditioned 150 boys for that role.
Oh God.
And I told our casting director I wanted the Christian Bale from Empire of the Sun. That was the level of talent we were looking for, and we found him.
And I knew that he would be able to carry the movie in the fun moments and in the silent moments.
Luke is the key here. He's the linchpin.
He really is. It doesn't work without him.
No. I can't think of any other child actors or young actors in his age area that really could have brought to life and to the light what Luke brings to Lost on a Mountain in Maine. It truly is. It's an award-worthy performance.
I'm going to relay that to him. He'll be verklempt.
He just, he blew my mind. Blew my mind.
Now, he paid. Sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead, Andrew.
Well, I was going to say, he's. I just want to gush about him some more because he's on a different level than a lot of kid actors because his favorite actor is Anthony Hopkins. His favorite movie is The Elephant Man. He takes after River Phoenix and Daniel Day-Lewis, and I got to see him become a young man on this movie because he's about, when he shot the film, he's about the same age as Don Fendler, the character in real life.
Oh.
And he went from the beginning of the movie from just being a 12-year-old boy, and by the end of it, he had become a young man, and he had grown into this performance and took it so seriously that at points he was just sitting in a corner listening to classical music and just focusing.
Wow.
It was pretty amazing to watch.
Well, and you see a lot of growth and transformation in Luke by way of the character as the film goes on, because we first meet Don Fendler and he is perpetually angry because of his father. And he doesn't know where to direct this anger. And his dad's not there all the time, and he kind of feels like he's stepping in and has to be like the man of the house, but he doesn't want to be. So he's got a lot of untapped anger there, which a lot of kids do, and they throw their temper tantrums and they storm off. And that's exactly what puts the wheels in motion of this story. But to watch Luke's performance as the bratty kid throwing a tantrum, to then being on his own and then coming into his own as he realizes, hey, this is really great and fun. I'm out here in the woods. I'm in waterfalls. I'm climbing. I'm eating berries. This is so cool. But then it's, oh my God, now I'm bleeding. Mom isn't here to bandage me. What do I do? And you slowly see this transformation where Don and Luke at the same time comes into their own with gaining a sense of responsibility and maturity. And it's really wonderful to watch, Andrew.
Thank you. I mean, again, I couldn't have done it without him. And I think my performance as a director improved over the movie because of how much I saw him bringing his A game every day. I'm like, wow, this kid really has it. I better up my game as well. And the story, one of the entry points for me into the story when I, to consider directing it was that father-son dynamic. And I saw an opportunity to not just tell a story about a father and son who can't get along, but to actually explore a story about male vulnerability. And these two people that think they have to behave a certain way with each other, but they actually don't. And they learn over the course of the movie through this ordeal, wait, it is possible for us to just tell each other that we love each other. I reminded everybody, every day on set, I reminded the crew, this is a movie about a boy who just wants a hug from his dad.
Yeah.
That's what it is ultimately, and that's what he gets in the end. Spoiler alert,
It's a true story, therefore there can be...
Exactly.
We know how it ends. We know how it ends.
He wrote a book about it, we know he survived.
How did this story find its way to you, Andrew?
So this is kind of a classic. I'm a writer-director by trade, but this is a classic for hire situation where a script is sent to me by my management company, and it happened to be under Sylvester Stallone's umbrella, which, as a child who was born in the 80s and grew up in the 90s, of course, Sylvester is an icon. And he's more than an icon. I always tell people, one interesting factoid about me is that I was born and raised in Madagascar. And I'm the son of Lutheran missionaries. And growing up in Africa, I lived there for half of my life. And growing up in Africa, a guy like Stallone is not just an icon, he's kind of a god in a weird way. because there's not, you don't have much to cling on to there. So like there's, these celebrities do this thing. So it was a big deal for me to get a script sent by his company to me. And then I went through an interview process, just like a classic boring interview process that ultimately crested after about 3 months of interviews with me being flown out to northern Maine and actually climbing the titular mountain of the movie. That was my final interview. And luckily, I made it to the top. It's not an easy hike. It's the end of the AT Trail. It's the hardest non-technical hike in America. It was not easy, but I got to the top, and about a week later, I got the deal offer for it.
Wow.
So we tried to make it immersive. At every turn, the movie, we were immersed in nature and in wilderness, even in the interview process. And I think that does come through in the final film.
It definitely does, Andrew. And once this was put into your lap, how did you begin to break this down, break Luke's script down, so that you could have just had the camera going through the wilderness. We could have had a Disney Beaver Valley kind of film from the 1950s. That's not what you do. So I'm curious how you then broke this down and approached it to bring this story to life on screen.
One of the things that appealed to me about the script was that it was a movie that I hadn't seen in a long time. I grew up on The Black Stallion and Empire of the Sun, and these are very artful, almost somewhat adult movies about children. But they never forget, they don't talk down to children. They're just about a child. And as a kid, The Black Stallion instilled me with a sense of wonder and awe, and I wanted to be there riding that horse alone on that island. And I saw an entry point for this movie to do the same exact thing. We're going to make an adult drama about adult problems, parenting, and the loss of a child. And we're just going to approach it from that angle, almost like an Edward Zwick movie or something, but it also just happens to be made for kids. And so at every turn, I was trying to make something that was an emotional epic, that was maximalist in the way the camera moves throughout the wilderness, and approach the scope of it. And this is not a spectacle movie, right? This is not The Revenant where he's jumping off of trees, off of cliffs, and fighting bears. This is a movie, again, it's about parents trying to find their son, and the son trying to get home to them. There's no place like home. So for me, to treat it like an adult drama was my way of grounding it, and I think making it timeless. That was kind of my goal, is to make something that kids and parents could enjoy for the next 50 years if they wanted to. And a lot of that is just not talking down to your audience. And it's a kids movie, and I think kids will go to it because kids think it might be fun to be lost for a little while. But in the end, the parents and grandparents will go too, and they will get something completely different from it.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Now, did you shoot this at the actual mountain in Maine, or did you find another location?
It's a great question. The answer is both. We shot the majority of the movie in upstate New York because of tax incentives and all that boring stuff. And we found locations that approximated what it would look like in Maine. Oftentimes a tree is just a tree is a tree. But it was very important to me because I also grew up in South Dakota, so for me, home state is always a very important thing, and I understand, this is a very important story from Maine. So I wanted to make sure that we went to Maine. So we did about a week in Maine as well, where we did aerials out of a helicopter. A crew hiked the actual mountain with, 50-pound bags. I got a 50-pound pack on my back. With the camera and the lenses, we hiked the mountain in a storm, so we could capture storm footage. We hiked through marshes and swamps. So the movie is a combination of both, and through, of course, brilliant editing by our editor, Andrew Drazik, we pieced it all together, and, none would be the wiser, I think.
Oh.
So it's a combination of both. And also the mountain is also built. So in addition to going up there, we also built in upstate New York on a soundstage an 80-foot by 80-foot replica of the mountain. With giant foam core boulders, and we had lichen experts who knew how to paint lichen come up from Manhattan and paint the lichen, so it was kind of like it was up in Maine. And then we just surrounded that little set with, it wasn't little, it was pretty big, with fans, giant fans, sprinkler systems and fog machines, and we just pummeled those children for 3 days straight, and we had a ball. It was really fun.
Wow. Well, and I love the fact that you said that you did capture actual footage of storms up on the mountains and the fog and all of that, because I was watching that and I'm like, there is no way this is rainbirds. This is no way this is sprinklers happening. This has to be real footage of a storm on a mountain. So
that means we did our job right. So, and I have to give credit to the production designer and the cinematographer who are more experienced in those things. And they pushed, let's do this practically, let's build it, let's do it like they did it, again, in the 80s and 90s before we had visual effects. And I think it sells it way better.
It really does, especially with a film that is this, it's an intimate film. The scope may be big in terms of a huge mountain and a little boy and the emotions that are being unpacked in here. But ultimately, it is very intimate. It's kind of like a David versus Goliath situation.
It is, yeah. And you mentioned the Mother Nature aspect of it. Like that, the mountain is a character in the film itself and the surrounding area. And also literally manifests in the form of, a spirit as well, and that lends to that intimacy.
That one scene, I'm not going to give away spoilers, but Andrew, that manifestation scene is, I love how you've got the tie back to a campfire story, and later on this manifestation comes. That was incredible, and the way that Edon just pushed that camera in on Dawn. Just
trust that kid to do the performance.
Wow. And his hand, we see the black that is caressing him, almost enveloping him in warmth and ease that just covers his face.
It's an incredible scene because obviously this is my first movie with using many millions of dollars to make, but it still is an independent film, right? It's still an indie film, so we still had to be resourceful. And if you notice, most of that scene is done through sound design.
Yes.
Sound design and the power of suggestion. The old Jaws mentality.
Yep.
We can't make this look great. We don't have enough money to build a creature in visual effects, so let's just go back and do a throwback. And ultimately, that was the last scene that we shot with Bloom, was that monologue of the entire shoot. We saved it for the end.
Wow.
And it's intimate, it's raw, like you said, it's sometimes you almost can't hear it, and that's by design, because he's really spilling his soul. And I think, I'm really curious to see how people take that scene, because it can work on many levels. It's meant to.
I'm glad you brought up sound, because your sound design here and the mix is really impeccably done. The attention to detail, especially because there is so little dialogue. When we have Dawn lost on the mountain and in the forest, there is so little dialogue. There's him yelling out into the universe. Hello, being a kid, I was waiting for a I'm king in the world kind of moment, because that's how you felt watching him. But the sound, the ambient sound of nature, be it mist, be it the waterfall, be it the torrential downpour, the thunder, the lightning, the crickets, the cicadas, just
the loons.
The loons.
The loons. Yeah, I love the loons. At any moment, I was like, more loon. If you get more loon, I'm all about the loon. It's funny. The guy who did the sound design for this is actually a guy who works mostly in horror films. His claim to fame is the movie Midsommar and Hellraiser and all these very intense movies. But I knew he was the right guy. He's sweet as pie too. But I knew he was the right guy for this because he would bring an intensity to everything. And one little fun tidbit is that spirit character that we won't talk too much about.
Right.
I got to bring in the sound design, a little bit of my past from Madagascar into that. And that creature's sound design, much like, in Jurassic Park, they're using chainsaws to do the sound of the T-Rex. We actually use the sound of lemurs. I don't know if you knew this, but lemurs have the loudest animal cry, the second loudest animal cry of
Yes.
any animal in the animal kingdom behind the humpback whale. And I was like, why don't we use the lemur to be the sound of the spirit of Mother Nature? I think it works beautifully, and it was a fun little Easter egg for me.
Oh my God. Well, I know Rick Schnupp is an excellent sound designer.
He's a master.
Whether he's a sound designer, a mixer, a sound editor, he can tackle any element. I mean, he's done some amazing work in films like How to Blow Up a Pipeline, or even working on Free Solo, which is a lot of elements of Mother Nature coming in there. So you lucked out getting Rick for sound.
I mean, Rick is amazing, and also, I have to mention as an offshoot, like the composer of the movie, in terms of like bringing wilderness into the film, Garth Stevenson, who I've worked with on 2 films so far, on this movie, like we wanted to do something that I wanted a big, broad score, I miss John Williams scores,
Mm-hmm.
I miss like a melody. Movies have too much just kind of background score. So we wanted a melody, but Garth is also an outdoorsman, and he used branches of trees to beat drums, and he put rocks under the strings of his piano when he was doing piano chords in the movie. So nature itself helped build not only the soundscape of the movie, but the score itself.
Garth is amazing. I first took note of him with what he did with Chappaquiddick a number of years ago.
Beautiful score.
And I know that his technique, he does a lot of things like putting the rocks there. That's the kind of stuff that Volker Bertelmann does.
Yeah.
Volker's one of the most inventive composers around, and I just love him dearly.
I love that you're mentioning Volker. That's great. That's a deep cut, and I love it.
But Garth's score, as I said at the top, this is a marriage of imagery, music, and then Luke's performance. Mm-hmm. If you just had the imagery and Luke's performance, it wouldn't work. If you just had the imagery and the music and not Luke's performance, it wouldn't work. If you had imagery and Luke but no music, not this score, this nature-based score, wouldn't work. This is truly
I agree.
a triumvirate.
I knew when I read the screenplay the first time, the last 10 pages of the movie, there was a bunch of dialogue, and I thought to myself, we don't need any of this. This is going to be like the ending of E.T., and it's just going to be wall-to-wall music, and it's going to be triumph and catharsis. And so Garth's mandate, we cut it in the editing room and did our thing, and we had all that, all the documentary footage as well. And then Garth went and made this 5-minute behemoth of a score that just is meant to grab your heart and rip it out in a good way, of course.
Garth's work, and here in particular, always reminds me of a Max Steiner and Steiner's work. You just listen
That was the highest compliment. That's amazing.
I mean, you just listen to Gone with the Wind. There's plenty of time. There's no dialogue at all, but you feel. Mm-hmm. And that's what Garth does with this composition. You feel the emotion.
And I think that scores, as of late, have forgotten how to let audiences feel.
Yeah.
Make audiences feel. I feel that often they recede into the background, not to stump another movie, but I love the movie The Wild Robot, and the score in The Wild Robot, oh my God,
it's beautiful.
That's what should do. Yeah.
It's beautiful. Now, how difficult was it, Andrew? Because 90% of this film, 80% of this film is Luke and Mother Nature and a mountain. But then you've also got a very impactful performance from Caitlin Fitzgerald as Don's mother, Ruth. Similarly, Paul Sparks as his dad, as Don Sr. How difficult was it casting around?
Casting, especially in an indie film, can always be a chore.
Yeah.
But I knew what I wanted were classy actors, number one. People that fit the era, but also felt modern in a weird way, because to me that was kind of the gateway to making this movie timeless, is that it's a period piece, but it feels contemporary at the same time. And Maine, Caitlin's from Maine. So Caitlin was immediately connected to the material, and she had actually met Don Fendler when she was a kid in grade school. So she was immediately like, I got to do this. And she also happens to be a brilliant actress. So she came on, and she liked what I had done. I did a small rewrite in the script where I sort of augmented the mother grandmothers. My grandmother's 96. She's still the woman I call for advice. You know, my mother was a Trinidadian, and she was bullheaded and very moral and a humanitarian. So for me, mothers in movies have to be a force of nature. And so it's no mistake that the first thing you see in this movie of the mom, she's ripping off her apron and casting it to the side. And that was something that Caitlin really loved. And so we tried to make sure that she had the most agency. You know, the men in this movie are kind of, you know, Paul is going through this, the dad is going through this kind of reckoning, right? Like, what have I done wrong? This is my fault. And mom's like, well, we gotta rally the troops. We gotta take charge. And so Caitlin brought that ferocity to the performance and refused to let her just be this puddle of tears, but rather, you know, a force of nature, literally. Whereas Paul immediately, even before we cast Paul, he and I had a conversation about the character, and Paul said, I feel that there's a modern man trapped inside of Mr. Fendler that just desperately wants to come out. And he's bottled up, and he thinks this is the way of the world, but it's actually not. And this ordeal is going to break him wide open. And so I just felt they understood it, and they came to play, and they had worked together before, so they just kind of had a great chemistry and a loose dynamic. And there's that wonderful, my favorite moment in the movie is that two-shot where the dolly's pushing in and the mother and father are sitting on the stoop in silence. And she leans into him, and they spit, and she spits. And to me, like, that's just something we kind of came up with on the fly, because I'm like, we need to understand who these people are and what their relationship is. And you can't do that without great actors.
Yeah, and of course that ties directly into young Don, who his father was always yelling at him for spitting.
Exactly.
So it's like, okay, we kind of know where Don gets this from. He gets this from his mother. And, you know, and her fortitude and her, I'm going to do what I want to do attitude. Take no prisoners. But the casting is really, really well done. And
thank you.
Very curious, and going with the whole idea of the guys in this film. Ethan Slater is Henry. I still want to know what guide with a storm rolling in would take a kid up to the top of a mountain. I don't care if it's 1939, 1999, 2029.
A guide who used to play SpongeBob on Broadway. That's the answer there. You know, it's funny, like, that character, I didn't know who Ethan was when I cast him. He sent in a tape, and obviously the audition was for that campfire scene, that monologue, that stuff, you know, the mystical elements of the movie. And I tend to research actors heavily, but we were in the throes of pre-production, and I just saw these tapes, and he was just obviously excellent. And then I realized when he showed up to set, all the kids were obsessed. Like, oh my God, I can't believe it's Ethan Slater. I'm like, who? What? And they say SpongeBob, and I realized, I just cast a Tony-nominated actor in this role. and he was sweet as pie. He was the nicest guy. He's so professional. He's an amazing actor. He's very technical, but very loose at the same time. And I'm very excited about his big splash with audiences worldwide and Wicked coming out. He was great, you know, and I think his earnestness kind of sells the, we'll go up the mountain.
Yeah.
I'll take him up. Don't worry, I got him, sir. You know, I think it takes an earnest performance to make that work.
Oh, definitely.
And like, you're right, like that whole event where he gets lost is caused by precipitous events of bad decisions, essentially. You know?
Really bad decision. Really bad decision. But Ethan really sells the and earnest is the right word for it, because he really brings an earnestness to Henry as he goes back down the mountain and says, I lost your kid.
He feels bad about it, genuinely.
Yes. Now, was safety ever a concern on the set? Because being out in nature, you have kids involved. Primarily it's Luke, but you've got other kids running around as well. And just the very essence and nature of this film, was safety a big concern for you?
It was. It was of utmost importance, and our assistant director, who is this wonderful French woman in Caroline Aragon, she had that at the forefront of her mind every single day. At the beginning of the day, we had a safety meeting, and especially because of the kids, when they're on set, watching them, basically shadowing every move. Because you never know, like we were shooting in some precarious places and they could, slip off a rock, but we were very vigilant all the time. Because, my job as a director, beyond telling a good story and getting good performances from my actors and, leading the ship, part of leadership is to make sure you're taking care of all the people around you that you're working with. And it obviously reflects poorly on me if something bad happens. We've seen how that goes sideways on film sets. So, it starts at the top and it goes from there. And for me, even though I'm a very brazen person and I love to do crazy things and go hiking, I will never make a crew member or an actor do something that I wouldn't do. That's my mantra. Now, I'll push myself to the limits. So, I'll jump out of an airplane with a camera if somebody would let me.
All right. Well, you need to hook up with Tom Cruise. So
I would gladly do that.
Now, a big element of this that I just love seeing are the actual interviews of family members, especially Ruth Fendler. You've got clips peppered throughout, people that were involved in the search, rangers. Was it always your intent to include those within the body of the film as interstitials, and then to have a bunch of stuff at the end of the film with real footage of the event?
The answer is no. The answer is that we made that decision in post-production. Wow. And the reason we did was we asked ourselves, what makes this movie special? What will set it apart? And why should people care about this story? And I think, incorporating the archival footage almost as chapter headings, kind of signposts in the movie, was a way to ground it and to remind people this actually happened. And this is why you should care about this little piece, this little sliver of American history, and this little, this little factoid about a community coming together and helping each other. And as we started digging into it, I used the movie Warren Beatty's Reds is one of my favorite movies, and he uses this technique in that movie as well. And so that was my creative sort of barometer for how to do that here. And we had the added benefit of, real 8mm footage of the boy actually being found, which we incorporated into it. And I think as we started splicing it in, it just took on a life of its own, and I wanted it to feel integrated and make it feel like it was part of the fabric of the story that you were watching. And by the end, this multimedia experience kind of comes together with the score into a catharsis.
Yeah.
It reminds people, isn't this amazing?
I love the vintage footage, the footage of the real rescue. I love the interviews. It makes me appreciate Caitlin's performance even more as Ruth. Because, boy, that one the interview clip you have in there of the real Ruth Fendler, she is feisty. And that's exactly what Caitlin brought.
Great.
That's what Caitlin brought to the role. But on every level, Andrew, so well done. This is such an emotional experience, a powerful experience. I love how faith is integrated into the story because without some kind of faith, you're not going to, be it a kid or adult, you're not going to make it through an event like that.
That was a careful consideration because, it's not a faith-based movie. That never was my intention, even though I grew up a missionary kid, so I know a little something about religion. But for me, what it is what I tried to make it was very universal, almost ecumenical, if I can use a religious term.
Yeah.
Or a theological term, that anybody of any belief, whether you believe or not, or whether you believe in animism, whatever it is, you can take something out of it. Because in the end, the thesis of the film, I think Don Fendler's thesis, which is the whole reason we made this movie, was to carry his legacy forward, is that you can do anything if you just believe in something a little bigger than yourself. That can be your family. So the idea of family, that's what pulls Don back, or it's Mother Nature, or God, or whatever it is. It's pulling you. What if something is pulling you in the general direction of good?
Yeah.
And that is what I want people to take away from it. And ultimately, what I want people to, my goal, and every movie I make, my goal is for people to sort of feel a sort of redemption at the end when the credits roll. My goal in this movie is for somebody who maybe hasn't called their child, or maybe a child hasn't called their parent in a while, to pick up the phone and call them and talk to them. That is my goal, is to just bring people together.
What did you take away for yourself, Andrew, as a filmmaker, as a storyteller? You talked about what you hope the audience takes away. What did you take away that you can now put forth in your future works?
That kindness is a virtue. You know, we're sometimes taught as leaders, and we live in a world now where I think we think that leadership has to be brash and it has to be almost negative and maybe tyrannical. But on this movie, I just tried to be nice to everybody and treat everybody with respect and appreciate their craft, and it worked. And we made a movie that's great. And so that's what I learned is, okay, I can keep doing this and be a director and be in this leadership position, and you can do it while also being a genuine human being. And that was a refreshing thing to discover, because I thought maybe I'd have to become like an asshole or something, which is kind of an asset of my personality. I was like, I don't think I can do that, but hopefully this works.
Oh, Andrew, on every level, this is a spectacular film. It is so moving.
Thank
and
you.
I can't wait for people to get to see it so they can experience this.
Go to theaters and see it. And this has been a delightful interview. You're really fun to talk to, so thank you.
Oh, well, thank you. You're wonderful to speak with. And the fact that, Balboa Productions picked up on this to begin with and got it to you, good move on their part.
A lot of synergy happened for that, so I'm very grateful.
Yeah. Oh, Andrew, I can't wait to see what you bring us next, and I hope we get to chat again in the future.
We absolutely will. Count on it.
All right. Well, you go have a great rest of your week and have fun with the rest of your interviews today.
Thank you.
And as I said, Lost on a Mountain in Maine is now in theaters nationwide. But, tidbit for you for added insight into this film. Later this week, go to BehindTheLensOnline.net and check out my exclusive interview with the film cinematographer, Idan Menon, who elaborates on what you just heard Andrew and I discussing about the making of this film. Well, that is all the time we have today. Next week, I'll be back in studio with actor Kamuni Nor Odaman. And I probably screwed up the pronunciation, but I'm sure Kamuni will correct me next week. He'll be talking up his new film, 1660 Vine. And by the way, not only is Kamuni an actor, he's also the prince of the Cambodian royal family. So we've got to dive into that next week. So until then, I'm Debbie Elias. This is Behind the Lens.